Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I am going to be looking at the weekend of March the 1st and March the 2nd, 2025. And the big event this weekend is Venus going stationary retrograde. And this is an event I'm going to be looking at in some detail later in this video. But I should warn you, but when I do talk about Venus being stationary retrograde, I do occasionally say stationary direct by mistake. I do know that Venus is going stationary retrograde, but there is a mix-up. I do this with new moons and full moons sometimes. I say new moon when I mean a full moon and vice versa. But anyway, I think you get what I'm trying to say. I also want to consider the horoscope of Boris Spassky. Boris Spassky, former Soviet chess champion of the world, who was born, interestingly, on January the 30th, 1937. So we've just had Gene Hackman's death, and that's obviously got a lot of publicity. It's getting a lot of publicity. And the reason for that is there's sort of a mystery surrounding what happened. And Gene Hackman was born on January the 30th, 1930. So these two men who've just died, Boris Spassky and Gene Hackman, very different people, were born exactly 7 years apart. So I wanted to look at Spassky and just reconsider this whole point about sort of new moons and what it means to have a new moon on your birthday. But before I look at all that, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today. Usual reminder, if you enjoy this video, I would be grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I would be very happy to have you as a subscriber. Apparently it's good to have as many subscribers as possible. So let's look at what's happening this weekend. So that is actually the chart of Barack Obama. I will actually be briefly looking at Barack Obama's chart because he had a new moon at his last solar return on his birthday. And that's a good example of that phenomena. So anyway, so here is the chart for the weekend. So I've set this for midnight on Sunday, March the 2nd, halfway through the weekend. And the moon is in Aries at midnight. And this is a reminder that on Saturday at 9:52 a.m. London time, the moon moves into Aries, moves out of Pisces into Aries. And that means that if you're in the Americas, the moon will move into Aries very early in the morning. And so if you're in the Americas, the whole weekend you can regard as being moon in Aries. If you're in Europe, Africa, pretty much the whole weekend. Though the beginning of the day, there will be some moon in Pisces. Now, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, then the moon doesn't move into Aries until, I don't know, something like Saturday evening, so there might be more of a division. You might maybe regard Saturday as being moon in Pisces, Sunday as being moon in Aries. Now, as far as the events are concerned, well, on Saturday we have that movement, moon moving into Aries, and we also have the moon making a sextile to Pluto. So the moment the moon moves into Aries, it starts making that sextile to Pluto, which is a useful aspect, but I wouldn't have said that it was terribly powerful. It allows us to assert ourselves to some extent, but then the moon is in Aries. Moon in Aries is quite an assertive placement. So more assertive than moon in Pisces. Moon in Pisces, moon in a water sign. We might be going with the flow, perhaps considering the way we feel about things. But with the moon in Aries, it might feel that now is the time to really start to take the initiative. And when the moon moves into Aries, that's important because the moon is now in a different sign from the sun. And so we had a new moon a day or two ago, and a new lunar cycle, but the moon is rather close to the sun, and so the moon might find it difficult to really show its true colours. But now that the moon is in a different sign from the sun, it has more independence. And so new moons are about the start of new things, new projects. And when the moon and the sun are in different signs just after the new moon, that can be a time when we can really start to get things together, and perhaps to announce our intentions, and to actually start to make things happen. And on Sunday, well, it might be actually Saturday. It's certainly in the Americas, it's Saturday. Early on Sunday, London time, 00:36 a.m., just after midnight, Venus is stationary retrograde. So Venus has been moving through Aries, getting slower and slower, and now it's come to a standstill. And that is an important event, and it means that Venus, to an extent, is weakened. It's not manifesting as it used to. I mean, it is in mutual reception with the Sun by exaltation, which does give it a certain amount of strength. But being retrograde and being in Aries, the sign of its detriment, is not great, and it's probably a bad idea to make decisions relating to art, decoration, spending a lot of money on making things beautiful with Venus going retrograde. Might not be such a good idea. But I will be looking in detail at Venus going stationary direct at the end of the video, towards the end of the video. And the moon makes a sextile to Jupiter, makes a sextile to Mars. So, not a sextile, square to Mars. So we do have, on Sunday, moon in Aries square Mars in Cancer. And that can be quite a difficult aspect. It means that some of us might feel that it's a time when we want to tell people how we feel. And if we get annoyed about something, we might not want to hold back. So that moon sextile Mars needs to be treated with a certain amount of caution. And we also have two quite important aspects at the end of the weekend, which will probably flow into the new week, and that is Mercury conjunct Neptune and Sun square Jupiter. And Mercury conjunct Neptune is one of those sort of classic psychic aspects. Mercury conjunct Neptune in Pisces, so Mercury is the way we are thinking, the way we communicate. Mercury's in Pisces. It's able to pick up all sorts of strange information, working on different levels, emotional information, body language, factual information as well. But it all gets a bit confusing, and it can be very spiritual, that Mercury conjunct Neptune, but it may be misleading, and we might reach the wrong conclusions, and it can be about lying and deception. So with that Mercury conjunct Neptune, don't necessarily believe what people tell you. Also, we've got Sun square Jupiter. Sun square Jupiter is exact at the end of the weekend, and Sun square Jupiter, you can overdo it with Sun square Jupiter, and you might want to take things to the next level and to the next level, and you might not know when to stop, or you might overindulge yourself, just getting into something Sun in Pisces, square Jupiter and Gemini, and you just don't know where to draw the line. And those two aspects, Mercury conjunct Neptune, Sun square Jupiter, yeah, they are important, and they do say something probably about the beginning of the new week. So looking at the weekend overall, I would have said that probably Sunday is a more active day than Saturday. On Sunday, things really click together. There are things going on, and maybe that should be the focus of our activities. Saturday is a bit up in the air, especially if you're in Australia or New Zealand. The moon starts a day in one sign, then it moves into another sign. Maybe more definite if you're in the Americas. But I do think there is some difference between the 2 days, and if we set the weekend for Sydney, Australia, rather than for New York. So New York, we've got the moon at 11 Aries on at the beginning of Sunday. If we set that chart for Sydney, then the moon is at 1 degree Aries, and so that chart, midnight on Sunday, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, it really does tell you that Sunday is all about moon in Aries. Saturday is about moon in Pisces, and you can see that on the evening of Saturday, if you're in Australasia, you've got a moon Neptune conjunction, and the moon is a bit vague there in late Pisces. So there is a bit of a difference between the Americas and Australia and New Zealand. So turning to the heliocentric picture, we put the Sun at the centre of a solar system where it should be, and Mercury is making a trine to Pluto. So Mercury gets the emphasis there. It often does with heliocentric charts because Mercury, is the fast mover. When we look at geocentric charts and the aspects, they are often lunar aspects because the moon is moving faster than anything else, especially if we're doing daily horoscopes. And the moon is really the only thing that's moving. In a heliocentric chart, it's Mercury that takes the place of the moon, because Mercury does move quickly. It takes 88 days to move around the sun, and heliocentrically. And Mercury making that trine to Pluto is a fairly intense aspect. It needn't be too dramatic, though. It's about being able to see things in different ways, in new ways, and perhaps having the impetus to really try to get to the bottom of things, not being satisfied with how things are on the surface. And this may link with the fact that, geocentrically, we've got Mercury conjunct Neptune. Heliocentrically, we have got Mercury trine Pluto. So over the weekend, we're perhaps receptive to higher level forces, and certainly we have the opportunity to become aware of things that maybe in the past we've completely missed. But if we open our eyes and if we open our hearts, we can really get to see the real picture. And with Mercury trine Pluto, there is a possibility that we can be gently manipulative, but we don't want to actually become deceptive, which some of us might be tempted to do because Mercury is conjunct Neptune. Mercury conjunct Neptune is geocentrically is a configuration which does sometimes find it a little bit difficult to tell the truth. So that's the heliocentric view. Not a huge amount going on there. So let's now look at things from a perspective of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for the weekend of March the 1st and 2nd, 2025. Aries. Aries things are starting to happen. The moon is moving into your sign, and when it moves into your sign, it makes a conjunction with Venus. So with this emphasis in Aries, okay, it's true that we've still got a lot of planets in Pisces, but now we have got the moon and Venus in Aries plus Chiron. It does mean that you're going to find it easier to be yourself. You don't have to pretend. You don't have to hold anything back. You can just say things as they are, but also you will have a certain amount of tact if you make the effort. If you want to be pleasant, if you don't want to upset people, then I think that it will be okay. You'll be able to interact in a way that is relatively harmonious, if that's what you want. Though it does seem that many of you are looking for something different, and you do have a certain disruptive streak. Now it's up to you what you actually do with this disruptive streak. You may feel that you're not going to impose it on anyone, but if there's anything going on that you don't like the look of, that you want to change, if you feel that it's absolutely essential that you assert yourself, then you can. And in the process, you can cause waves. You can cause trouble, again, if you want. I think you do have a choice here. And Aries, you are an individual. I mean, you're always an individual. But I think that this weekend, you're more of an individual than usual. You have a different approach. And it might be something that you just restrict to your own private life. But in certain situations, you may be of a view that you just have to let people know you're not happy with the way things are going. So, let's change it. And Aries, if you want to change things, you can. But just remember that if you do cause change, you're going to have to deal with the consequences of it. And if people feel that everything is disrupted, and if people lose their sense of security, then they could blame you. But it is a matter of judgment. Now, as far as other people are concerned, one thing we do have this weekend is Venus going stationary direct. And I will be talking about Venus going stationary direct in greater detail later in the video. But did I say Venus going stationary direct? Venus stationary retrograde. Venus has been going through Aries, through your sign, but slowing down, getting slower and slower and slower. Now, Venus in Aries may say something about how you relate to other people. And with Venus going stationary retrograde, that does mean that some people might be a little bit indecisive, and they may be becoming even more indecisive. And this might perhaps explain why you behave as you do. Other people could be annoying, and if they don't make their position clear, that may irritate you. You may just feel you have to say something, and you have to demand that people are more definite, more direct. But can you do that? I don't think you can. You have to live with a certain amount of ambiguity as far as other people are concerned. And you shouldn't push people for answers. I mean, they can give you answers, but are they going to be the real answers? Probably not. You have to be patient. You have to let Venus run its course. And arguably, Venus doesn't actually run its course fully until May the 15th, because Venus is at 10 degrees Aries, goes retrograde, it has sign changes, then it goes direct, and then it doesn't actually get back to where it is today until May the 15th. And so, over the next couple of months, it may be a time, Aries, where you have to be a little more patient than usual with people, and not assume that they're going to be direct and upfront. They're not you. You can't expect people to live their lives according to the same standards that may be very important to you. So a bit of tolerance could be quite important. Taurus. Venus is coming to a standstill. This weekend, Venus goes retrograde. And because Venus is your ruler, you might feel it. And, Venus is going retrograde for some time. I mean, it goes stationary direct on April the 12th, 13th. So for the next 6 weeks or so, you have Venus going retrograde. And with Venus going retrograde, you might feel a little bit uncertain of yourself. You might have felt that you are moving in a particular direction and you were sorting things out, but this weekend it might just feel that things are coming to a little bit of a standstill, and that certain things need to be maybe reconsidered. You hadn't understood them properly. You need to have a look at them again. And that might mean, Taurus, that you should avoid making commitments. I mean, you might like to make a commitment. I mean, Taurus is a very commitment-orientated sign. You like to be very clear about who you are and what you want, and you don't like to change your mind, and people don't expect you to change your mind. But this might be a time, Taurus, when you have to take something that you really believe in and have another look at it, and maybe accept that certain things have been misunderstood, and it might, in certain cases, be necessary to go back to the drawing board and just have another look at everything. And then, over the next few weeks, you can start to resolve things. When I say next few weeks, actually next 6 weeks, until the middle of April, when Venus goes direct again. And also, you don't have to reveal everything. Some things, Taurus, can be kept to yourself. Especially now. Venus is in Aries. It's about to go retrograde, and this weekend the moon is moving into Aries as well. So there is a feeling that not everything needs to be revealed, and that might incline you to be a little bit introspective. But when it comes to other people, the people that matter, there is a conjunction between the moon and Venus this weekend, and that Moon-Venus conjunction is pleasant, and it can be warm and friendly, provided things happen on your terms. So if you're socializing over the weekend, ideally it should be in a situation which you're very familiar with. It's not a weekend for meeting people in places you've never been to before. You have to do what feels right and not overwhelm yourself. You don't want to be overwhelmed with a huge amount of information, because if that were to happen, you wouldn't know what's going on, and your social skills might actually collapse. So stick to familiar ground, and it won't just be that you'll appreciate having things that are familiar, but I think other people will as well. If you're somewhere you've never been before, you are just not going to be on very good form. Gemini, we still have a load of stuff in Pisces, but not quite so much as we had a day ago, because the moon is moving out of Pisces into Aries. And with the moon moving into Aries, it might take some of the pressure off you, and it's kind of appropriate that the moon is moving into Aries on a Saturday and over the weekend. And that might mean at the end of the working week, as you moved into Friday, as you had that new moon, and it might all have been a little bit too intense. And then the moon moves into Aries, which is, for you, Gemini, quite a sociable sign. And so with the moon moving into Aries, you could, or you can, afford to relax more, and you can enjoy other people's company. And the moon in Aries, it's a fire sign, and it's possible that you can meet people who are exciting, not too exciting, but they're exciting enough, and they can give you sort of intellectual stimulation, and they can have ideas about what can be done. Geminis are always curious, and if you handle things right, I think that your curiosity can be sated. But there are a couple of aspects towards the end of a weekend which need to be taken into account. Those two aspects are Mercury conjunct Neptune and Sun square Jupiter. You will be feeling these aspects for the whole weekend. They might be particularly strong at the end of a weekend, though. So Mercury conjunct Neptune. Mercury is your ruler, it's conjunct Neptune. How do we understand this? Well, in a negative sense, Mercury conjunct Neptune can be quite a confusing influence. Neptune is the planet of confusion. And so if Mercury is conjunct Neptune, you may not know what you're doing. And if you are trying to do anything concrete over the weekend, like planning or making decisions, with Mercury conjunct Neptune, you just might be all over the place. You might not know what you're doing, and you might not know which facts are important, which facts can be discarded, and if you try to engage with the material world, then things might go wrong very quickly. And it's just because you don't understand what's happening, or you just get misled with Mercury conjunct Neptune. And that means that it's probably not a good idea for making firm commitments. Geminis don't really like making commitments anyway. They should probably avoid making commitments. But with Mercury conjunct Neptune, commitments really should be avoided. And while it's true that you yourself could be the victim of deception, it does work both ways. Geminis do have a reputation for being liars and for being economical with the truth. I'm a Gemini, just a reminder, so I'm not singling you out, or maybe I'm just projecting what's true for me. I'm not a liar, though. I'm not. I find it really difficult to tell lies. I'm a very bad liar, and so maybe this doesn't apply to me. But it is said that some Geminis are liars and can really mess around with the truth. So if you're the kind of person that is economical with the truth, that tends to be economical with the truth, that Mercury conjunct Neptune might encourage you to tell lies or to distort the facts. And you can be very good at it with Mercury conjunct Neptune. Also, heliocentrically, Mercury is making a trine to Pluto. And so that Mercury trine Pluto might actually make you a very good liar, and you know how to deceive people. But is this the right thing to do, Gemini? That is a matter between you and your conscience. Or should I say a matter between you and your God. You have to work out what is the right thing to do. But most Geminis, at least most of you who are watching this channel, watching the Gemini section of this video, I'm sure that you're not going to be tempted to deceive other people. Now, Mercury Neptune has another dimension talking about God and spirituality and the supernatural. Mercury conjunct Neptune is quite a cosmic combination, and it might make us aware that we are not alone on this planet, that there is something out there, and it might be that we have thoughts and feelings that are a little bit unusual. It may be that something is trying to communicate with us, and we should pay careful attention to our dreams and our imagination. Mercury conjunct Neptune, really very imaginative, and you can conjure up all sorts of pictures. Some of these pictures, maybe most of these pictures, are going to be fantasy. But just because something is fantasy, it doesn't mean that it should be discarded. And the fantasy might have a core of actual reality, and we have to perhaps try to distinguish between the two. Another aspect we've got is Sun square Jupiter. Sun square Jupiter could encourage us to overdo things, and that Sun square Jupiter, you could say, is quite ambition orientated, and some Geminis might feel that they need to do something to advance their ambitions over the weekend. But is that really necessary? And I think if you find yourself being too ambitious over the weekend, if you find yourself compelled to just focus on one thing of apparently overarching importance, if you are compelled in that direction, you might nonetheless take things too far, especially as there is that Mercury conjunct Neptune. You might just move in the wrong direction, and probably it's a time to be putting emphasis on the spiritual and the conceptual rather than on the material. It's still important what's going on materially, but this weekend, don't exaggerate, and maybe you should respect the fact that it is a weekend. If you have a weekend where you take things seriously, if you're working over the weekend, then it may be a weekend where you just overdo it and you make mistakes. So try to relax and try not to take anything too seriously over the course of this weekend. Cancer, the moon is moving out of Pisces and into Aries. And with the moon moving into Aries, you are becoming a little more definite. With the moon in Pisces, there was a lot to consider, a lot to take into account, and ideally, you should have had an open mind, and you should have been aware that there were different possibilities. You didn't have to commit yourself to any one thing. You could see what was available, and you could play with your own ideas. But now that the moon is moving into Aries, things are a little more definite, and you have a clearer sense of who you are and also what you want to achieve. And it kind of builds up over the course of the weekend. I think Cancer, that the beginning of a weekend, things might be a little bit slow, and it might just take things a long time to get going. But as you move into Sunday, the pace does really start to speed up, and the moon is making a conjunction to Venus, and that Moon Venus conjunction it's very charismatic, and it allows you to project yourself, and you have a clear sense of how other people see you, and that might make you a little bit self-conscious, wondering about your appearance and feeling that you should make some effort to change your appearance, or perhaps to worry that your appearance isn't quite good enough. I mean, don't overdo it. The moon conjunct Venus in general is an aspect that does make you attractive, that does make you stand out. And then the moon goes on and it makes a square to Mars, and that is a feature more at the end of the weekend, certainly more Sunday than Saturday, but with Moon square Mars, that allows you, Cancer, to be pretty assertive. You've already got Mars in Cancer, so Mars has been in Cancer for some time, and so with Mars in Cancer, you can look after your own interests. Moon square Mars, you can very much project your own interests, and if there is any form of conflict, you'll really be able to rise to the occasion. And once Cancer gets annoyed about something and feels that something needs to be put right, you will, in most cases, be able to act very quickly and to really sort the matter out. And it's certainly unwise on Sunday for anyone to cross swords with you, because if they do, I think they're unlikely to come out unscathed. And one final point, Mercury is making a conjunction to Neptune, and this conjunction between Mercury and Neptune can be quite a spiritual influence. Mercury is how we perceive things, it's how our mind works, and it's also what we're in touch with. And it's conjunct Neptune, and it's in Pisces. And Pisces in a Cancer chart is quite a spiritual sign. And with Mercury conjunct Neptune, while it's possible that you could just confuse yourself, that there could be fantasies, and you might imagine you're in communication with something when you're not, and it might just be your unconscious chattering away, but it's an energy that you're fairly familiar with, and I don't think there's any reason for you to be confused. And if you just be open about this Mercury conjunct Neptune and just accept that you can be in touch with things, you can really understand things in a new way. And you might feel that you're in touch with someone, something, and also you're going to be in touch with the collective with Mercury conjunct Neptune. We are all connected to the collective unconscious at some level, and it's like that diagram that Carl Jung has with these sort of islands rising up above the ocean, and we are consciously like these islands, and we are apparently independent, but deep down, all of us below sea level, we're all connected, and that connection between us all, that connection to the collective with that Mercury conjunct Neptune in Pisces, does make you more connected than usual. So if you get a feeling about some collective trend, And perhaps it manifests in your thoughts. It could manifest through your dreams. If you do get that kind of feeling, then your feeling is probably on the right tracks. And if you really think about it, you'll have an understanding of the way things are going, and that might make things less confusing. If you understand the way things are going, you'll then be able to develop a sense of perspective. You might also be able to act in your own interest, to be thinking about where you stand in it all and how you might want to position yourself in the immediate future. Leo. Leo, we have the moon in Aries. We also have Venus in Aries, and from a Leo perspective, that is something to welcome, I would say. There's been a lot of planets in Pisces, and it could have been all too much. And Leo, you might have felt that you just are not really on the same wavelength as other people with all that stuff in Pisces, and you might have felt confused, and things just might have been too emotional. And now with the moon in Aries joining Venus in Aries, things are a bit easier. It's easier for you to relax and also to see the broad view. The broad view does matter, and that broad view, it starts as a moment of chaos, as a moment of confusion, but then you break free, and then you see things perhaps as they are. And and also, we've now got two planets in fire signs, moon and Venus in fire signs, and okay, Chiron as well, but I wouldn't count Chiron too much in terms of elemental balances. And with moon Venus in fire signs, you just feel more at home, and you can start to tune into your intuition, and you have a sense of connectedness, and that connectedness is about you and the world around you, and you kind of understand what's going on without really having to think about it. And if you're meeting people over the weekend with that moon-Venus conjunction, then it's going to be relatively easy to make a judgment. And one thing, though, is that Venus is going retrograde. So it's stationary retrograde. And with Venus stationary retrograde may mean that some things in your life have to be put on hold or delayed. So there may have been certain things that you were really sort of quite excited about. You thought that now is the moment. You were perhaps thinking next week you were going to get things moving. But maybe you should think about a longer time scale. Because while Venus is retrograde, there may be quite a lot of working out to do, and there may be aspects of your own ambition structure. We all have an ambition structure, how we see the future, how we want to act in the future. It doesn't matter how old we are or what our situation is. We all, at some level, have a series of ambitions. Well, unless we've reached nirvana, but I certainly haven't reached nirvana. And so with your ambitions, you may need to reconsider matters while Venus is retrograde, and Venus is retrograde until, when's it retrograde? Until April 12th and 13th. So over the next 6 weeks or so. You shouldn't really feel that you are going in one direction and you know which direction you're going in, because things change. And you also, need to get a different perspective, and that's what's happening. You are getting a perspective, and your perspective is good at the moment. You are seeing the broader view, but it's part of a process, and arguably, Leo, you're at the beginning of a process, and it does take time, and that's something that you should be completely used to. But don't worry. The sun is your ruler. It's in mutual reception by exaltation with Venus, so that is going to really help you. So as you develop a new perspective, you will change as a person, and you may in some respects be more mature and more knowledgeable and more definite in 6 weeks than you are now. And another aspect we've got Sun trine Jupiter. Sun square Jupiter. End of a weekend. And so that is an important aspect, Sun square Jupiter. And, because the Sun is you, and the Sun rules Leo, it is square Jupiter, and it does indicate that although this weekend you are becoming more sociable, you're someone who is easier to get on with, you could take things too far, or you could be encouraged to take on too much in a social sense. So if you are meeting people over the weekend with that Sun square Jupiter, particularly on Sunday, late on Sunday, then it's possible that you get annoyed, or other people are just too much trouble, they're exhausting. And that means that maybe in terms of your plans for Sunday, especially late on Sunday, you shouldn't necessarily meet people unless it's done in quite an informal way, where you're not committing yourself to hours and hours of your time, because some people can be really annoying, and they can be very demanding with that Sun square Jupiter. And if you find yourself under pressure, then you might respond in a way that is regrettable. So don't take things too far, and don't allow other people on Sunday to take up too much of your time. Virgo, the big aspect this weekend is perhaps a conjunction between Mercury and Neptune. And Mercury is your ruler, of course, and it's conjunct Neptune. And so this Mercury-Neptune conjunction might, in certain cases, make you vulnerable to being confused. And it might be difficult to know what's going on, especially if you take what people say and do at face value. And that's perhaps what you'd like to do. Trust people. Assume that they're telling the truth. Assume that they know what they're doing. But if you do that, then you are taking a risk. And this Mercury-Neptune conjunction is, it is in Pisces. It is in your opposite sign. It does say quite a lot about other people and their behaviour and how you treat them and what they say. And if you give other people full control without asking questions, you could be led in a direction that is regrettable, and you might not know what's going on. But it's a difficult balance, because it's not just the fact that we've got Mercury conjunct Neptune. We also have North Node conjunct Mercury conjunct Neptune. So it is a time, Virgo, when you shouldn't be totally obsessed with yourself and being in control, and you need to allow people to have their say, allow people to take the initiative, and give people a chance. So you've got to do that. It's the right thing to do, but you need to know when to stop. And it's probably a case where you just need to not believe anything anyone says, but at the same time don't necessarily assume that they're lying. Be open-minded, but also be completely skeptical. And with Mercury conjunct Neptune, don't allow yourself to be encouraged to make a commitment or to say that you're going to do something. It might be easy, but if you're forced into making commitments, if you're forced into signing on the dotted line with Mercury conjunct Neptune, as could be the case, then I'm not convinced that that's going to work out particularly well. And this Mercury conjunct Neptune does have another dimension. Mercury conjunct Neptune can be quite a spiritual aspect, and it can put you in touch with something which goes beyond yourself. And if you can be part of the collective, feel part of it, that would be good. But always, always, always remember your own boundaries. What is your domain? What is other people's domain? We don't want to mix those two up. And it's often said, isn't it, in spiritual circles, that you've got to let go of your ego. And it's a terrible thing, having an ego. And I remember going to an astrology class, having these ideas about letting go of one's ego and so forth, and being corrected, I think, by the astrology teacher. The astrology teacher, reminding me that we need egos. I clearly remember that. If we don't have egos, we can be crazy. I mean, without egos, we're mad, basically, because we lose all touch with who we are. Egos are there for a purpose. They are the thing that holds everything together. And so with Mercury conjunct Neptune, don't go overboard on letting go of your ego. You need an ego. And if other people are overstepping the mark, then you've got to back off. If you are a psychic, for example, so if that's what you do, or maybe even if you're a psychotherapist or a counsellor with Mercury conjunct Neptune, if you're working over the weekend, that can be overwhelming. Your ego and your sense of integrity could be loosened a bit, and you could get overwhelmed by the tide of emotion and other people's garbage, and that's not really what you want. So with Mercury conjunct Neptune, you do have to look after yourself, and do make sure that your boundaries are respected. Libra. Venus is your ruler, and Venus is going stationary retrograde. So this weekend, Venus comes to a standstill. From the Earth's perspective, and this is an astronomical event. We can actually define it astronomically. From the Earth's perspective, we look at Venus from the background of the stars, and it appears not to be moving. And so it is a real event. And with Venus going stationary direct, that might be how stationary retrograde. With Venus going stationary retrograde, that might be how you feel. That things are coming to a standstill. Things have gone as far as they can, but now you have to stop and work out what has happened. And it may be, Libra, that you have to go back over old ground. And you might not have all the answers. You might have thought you had all the answers, but now you're feeling maybe not. Maybe you do need to look at things again. And so if you have agreed to do anything, Libra, then try not to be tied by it. Librans like to say yes, but you can't say yes all the time. And sometimes you have to say no, and you have to refuse to commit yourself. And it may be that if you've made commitments in the past, with Venus suddenly going stationary retrograde, you might have to think very carefully about those commitments. Maybe you need to find a way of getting out of those commitments. So the fewer ties you have at the moment, the better. And with Venus going stationary retrograde, you may start to have a few doubts about other people. So if there have been new people coming into your life, new people you have been associating with recently over the last few weeks, then you might have second thoughts. Maybe these people aren't as good for you as you'd previously realized, and you have to be selfish. If you come to a conclusion that a person is going to undermine you, then don't hang around. It's actually okay to break off ties with such a person. It really is okay. It's not a time, Libra, for feeling guilty about it. Yeah, because you do have to look after yourself. But you also have to have a sense of understanding, make a special effort to understand people. And that's something you can do. Venus is still in Aries. Venus is in your opposite sign. And so with Venus in Aries in your opposite sign, you have a chance to get to grips with what people are really like. And it may not be that you can make immediate decisions, but certainly over the next few weeks, as Venus continues moving retrograde, the picture will maybe start to become clearer. And then when Venus goes direct, which will be in I think April the 12th, 13th, then that might be a time when the whole matter is resolved. On a more short-term level, though, the moon is in Aries and it is making a conjunction to Venus. So while I'm urging you to have some caution with relationships, that conjunction between the moon and Venus can actually be very fortunate for your relationship with certain other people. So if there are people who you really genuinely trust, people who you maybe had a relationship with for a long period of time, that Moon-Venus conjunction is going to really, really help. It allows you to come over as being a really quite pleasant person, and regardless of what you're feeling, regardless of what your inner doubts are, you certainly know how to carry yourself in a social sense with that conjunction between the moon and Venus. Though at the end of a weekend, the moon moves away from the conjunction of Venus and it actually makes a square to Mars. And that's Moon square Mars at the end of a weekend, and perhaps as you move into Monday, could be quite an important aspect, and it might create a bit of last-minute friction. Something annoys you, or something annoys someone else, and this annoyance would be made worse if you tried too hard to accommodate someone. If you try too hard to accommodate someone, it's actually making things worse, because people don't really appreciate accommodation. So they might say they do, but they don't really. And with Moon square Mars, it just may be a time, Libra, where you just have to be honest. And the sooner you're honest, the better, because if you leave it too late to be honest, or you're honest at the last moment when another person has started to make assumptions about you, then that can cause difficulties. So on Sunday, if you feel something needs to be said, just go and say it when it occurs to you, because the longer you leave it, the more difficult things could become. Scorpio, it's a weekend when Venus goes stationary retrograde. Venus stationary retrograde, it could impact your relationship with other people, and you shouldn't make assumptions about other people, and you shouldn't assume that there's any one thing they're going to do. If anyone has made a promise, you shouldn't necessarily hold them to it. I mean, you're a Scorpio, you're a fixed sign. If people do make promises, you assume that they will carry them out. I mean, if you're a typical Scorpio, if you're a pure Scorpio, all things being equal, but it's not really a good idea to make assumptions. You should give people the freedom to change their mind with Venus going stationary retrograde, and you should give them the opportunity. So if someone says that they're definitely going to do something, then get them to repeat it. Ask them if they're really sure. Tell them it's okay to change their mind. Give people every opportunity to change direction, because in that way you'll be avoiding disappointment, and you won't find that your own plans get messed up. And planning is important at the moment this weekend. You are looking for some kind of structure, and you want to know that everything is going to proceed in an orderly pace, and that's especially the case on Sunday. And what you don't want is someone changing their plans at the last moment. And so if you are making plans, make sure that there is an element of flexibility, and don't assume that other people are just going to do what they say. And there is a square aspect between the Moon and Mars, and that Moon square Mars can be about you getting annoyed. This square aspect is more at the end of a weekend, and with this Moon square Mars, it seems to be there's some aspect of the way details run that bothers you. It could be that you're trying to work something out, and someone tries to spoil things by creating a new problem. Or it could be you trying to break out and see the broader picture, but then there are these annoying little things that you have to deal with, and it really annoys you. It's not what you want to do, but you have to do it anyway. And that could be how the Moon square Mars works. But in general, this Moon square Mars could make you a bit irritable, again, especially at the end of a weekend. And that might mean that you should consider staying out of people's way, especially if you have had recent disagreements with them. So that's the social side of things, and also the side that relates to how you're trying to organize things, and sometimes your ideas about planning and organization and other people's ideas, they just might not be compatible. And also we have a conjunction between Mercury and Neptune. Now, this conjunction between Mercury and Neptune can actually be very creative. I mean, I've looked at this conjunction between Mercury and Neptune, for some of the 12 signs and how it's going to affect each of the 12 signs, and its effect is going to be different. And in your case, this Mercury-Neptune conjunction is likely to be quite creative and quite artistic, and can relate to your imagination. And there may be few limits to your imagination, and the way you're thinking about the world, the way you're thinking about your own inner world. So it's the outer world and the inner world. That inner world can be expressed in the outer world, and you get perceptions which you're picking up all the time, and you can somehow create something with them. So from an artistic perspective, that Mercury-Neptune conjunction does look really good. And with all these planets in Pisces, the moon might be out of Pisces, the moon might be moving into Aries, but there's still a load of planets in Pisces, and those Pisces planets are really creative, and that Mercury-Neptune conjunction just gives you access to stuff which you don't normally have access to. You kind of know it's there, but it's far more sort of immediate at the moment, and you're picking up all sorts of impressions, and you can take in these impressions and actually bring them down to earth and turn them into something real, perhaps through art or writing or whatever creative medium you find to be most suitable. Sagittarius, the Pisces emphasis, which I've been going on about, I perhaps have been talking about the Pisces emphasis for Sagittarians, and a bit too much. I use the phrase sort of rooted to the spot. I think maybe that was a little bit of an exaggeration, but this Pisces emphasis isn't as strong as it used to be, because we already have Venus in Aries, but now the moon is out of Pisces and the moon is in Aries. So moon in Aries, moon in a fire sign, Sagittarius is a fire sign, and it's probably going to feel good to have the moon in Aries. You no longer have the intensity of a new moon, because we just had a new moon in Pisces, and now with the moon in Aries, you can consider other possibilities. It's not just about you and your space and sticking to one particular place because it feels safe and secure. You can, with the moon in Aries, you can afford to be more adventurous, and you can start to think about possibilities. Maybe what's happened is you've created a secure foundation for yourself, and now that you've got that secure foundation, you can move beyond it and start doing things that are more interesting, and maybe taking a few risks, trying something out. You might embarrass yourself, but you might not. Maybe does it matter if you embarrass yourself? The important thing is that you're doing something which is a fundamental expression of you and your creativity. So that moon in Aries, moving into Aries, really is something that really should work very much in your favour. And also this weekend we have a square aspect between the Sun and Jupiter, and this does matter, this aspect, because Jupiter is your ruler, and it goes back to what I have been saying about what is important to you. It does relate back to these security concerns, and with that Jupiter's in Gemini. Jupiter in Gemini should be thinking about the other, because Jupiter is in your opposite sign. Jupiter rules Sagittarius. It's in Jupiter. Jupiter rules Sagittarius. It's in Gemini. It's about the other. It's about considering what other people want and how other people can be useful to you. But this Sun squared Jupiter is about dealing with someone's stubbornness, I think. Now, that someone could be you. There still seems to be something you're holding back on, or you may feel that you have a responsibility that trumps everything. But too much responsibility can be a problem, because if you feel over-responsible, you can't relax and you can't get anything done, and you're just a difficult person to have around. So you mustn't feel too responsible. And it may also be about trust with Sun square Jupiter, being able to trust people to do the right thing and not feeling that they have to be monitored all the time. And that might particularly apply in a family setting. So that Sun square Jupiter is something that you need to watch. It's difficult to know exactly how it's going to manifest, but it seems to be something to do with you, other people, what you take seriously, home, family, and you being tempted to overreact. And that is especially on Sunday. And another aspect we have is Mercury conjunct Neptune. And Mercury conjunct Neptune is also saying something about other people and their role in your life. And Mercury conjunct Neptune may represent a person who is sensitive, but also a person who might find it difficult to tell the truth, maybe because they don't know what the truth actually is. And this may especially apply when you're dealing with people you know well, perhaps members of your family, and they're saying things and you're listening to them and you're wondering whether they really know what they're talking about. And so however much you know someone, however much you trust someone, you should not take what they say at face value with this conjunction between Mercury and Neptune. It may be that they have just got things completely wrong, or they might have got the emphasis wrong. Mercury conjunct Neptune can represent a person who is sensitive, overly sensitive. I don't think that person is you. I think it's someone else. And it may just be that you have to respect other people's sensitivities, but not take what they say at face value. Capricorn, there is a bit of a change going on, because we have the moon moving out of Pisces and into Aries. And in fact, we've got a moon-Venus conjunction in Aries this weekend. And this moon-Venus conjunction could be quite comfortable, actually, feeling that you don't necessarily have to do anything in particular, and you can just enjoy yourself in your own space. Because moon-Venus conjunction in Aries, from a Capricorn perspective, Aries is quite a security-orientated sign, often connected with the home. You might want to spend time in your own home. You might find that if there's any entertaining to do, it's better for other people to see you rather than the other way around. I don't think, Capricorn, this weekend you're going to be especially in the mood for big trips, going to other people's houses, going out to restaurants. I don't think you'll be in the mood for that. I mean, you might be tempted, perhaps because there's outside pressure, but I don't think you'll enjoy yourself. Yet, on your own territory, you're fine. You're on really good form. And the moon, while it's moving through Aries, it does make a square to Mars, and that moon square Mars takes place on Sunday, late on Sunday, and this moon square Mars might make you annoyed about something, or someone could be annoyed with you. That's another possibility, and it could be about someone going too far, or someone intruding. I mean, not literally intruding. I'm not saying it's going to be an intruder, but someone sort of intruding on your space, just doing something that annoys you. And moon square Mars may be about someone expressing annoyance. Could be you expressing annoyance. It actually could be someone else expressing annoyance. Someone seems to be angry about something, and that someone could be a person who you know very well, who you spend all your time with, but something is irritating them. So at the end of a weekend, relationships should be treated with kid gloves. People may partners just maybe on edge a bit, and you do need to respect that. And so that's the moon square Mars, and moon is, as I said, is conjunct Venus. Venus is going stationary direct, and Venus is going to be stationary direct until the middle of April. Sorry, I get this wrong. It's not stationary direct. Venus is stationary retrograde. Venus is going retrograde, and so with Venus about to go retrograde, and it stays retrograde until April the 12th or the 13th, and that might say something about the structure of your ambition, and you may have new ideas about what you want, and you may not be entirely sure what you want. Maybe you thought you were sure, but now you're not so sure. And over the next 6 weeks, Capricorn, it might actually be a very good idea to have another look at things. Don't feel pressured to go anywhere or to move your life in any particular direction. I mean, you might have thought you sorted it all out, but you haven't necessarily sorted it all out. And if you want to really understand what's happening and what's right for you, you do need some space, and you might need to think about the best way of doing things. And if you're working, I would have said your best work is likely to be done at home. So if you have the chance to working at home, or at least in somewhere that you feel very familiar with, then that's when you're going to be on best form. If you have to go out of your way to do something, to be seen, to be heard, perhaps go into some office to do a job, that's not really where you're on best form. Of course, it does very much depend on your situation, but a lot of useful stuff can be happening at home. And you have a chance also, Capricorn, to really understand what is going on at an intuitive level, because there is a conjunction between Mercury and Neptune this weekend, and this conjunction between Mercury and Neptune is very sensitive, and it's also about you talking and listening, this Mercury-Neptune conjunction, and you can pick up all sorts of information. It's not just about reading something, it's about hearing someone say it, And when you hear someone say it, you pick up all the subtleties, and you really get what is happening. And so, it's not just about material facts. You have to go beyond those material facts, and you need to understand people's personalities and what people's position is, and you start to get all of this. And so in terms of information, but not standard information, the kind of information that is requiring a high level of almost psychic ability, that kind of information, you're very good at picking it up, and you're getting some powerful impressions, and things really are going to start to make sense. You don't have to make sense of them right now. You get these impressions, and then later on, over the next few days into next week, everything starts to become a lot clearer. Aquarius, you feel that you have a fair amount to say, but don't feel you have to say anything important. It's just the fact that you're trying to communicate that matters. It's not about really conveying serious information. And so maybe this weekend you should take things lightly. Don't feel that there's any absolute obligation to accomplish anything. And don't feel tied to any person or any place. Try, if possible, to just keep things moving, and accept that you might have a fairly limited attention span. It's easy to get bored, and so if something does bore you, then maybe you should just be moving on to something else. It's not really a time for commitment. And also, if you stay in one place for too long, or if you talk to another person for too long, the moon is in Aries, square Mars in Cancer, and so at a certain stage, that moon square Mars just may get annoyed, and you say one thing too much. You think it's unimportant, but in the end, by chance, if you keep saying enough words, in the end you'll say something that offends someone. So why take the risk? So that is a very good reason why, Aquarius, you should be trying to keep moving, and also avoid saying anything which is memorable. Because if you say something now, particularly if it's a statement of fact or a commitment to do something, if you say it now, then it might actually come back to haunt you. People might remember. So that's why you should avoid saying anything too important, or avoid saying you're going to do something, because you might be held to it. And it is a time, Aquarius, where a lot of people, including you, might change their mind. And what seems absolutely clear this weekend may not be quite so clear next week. Things might change. So you don't want to be in a position where you've committed yourself to a plan of action which actually you have no intention of carrying out. At least once you see all the facts, you'll realize that's not something that you particularly want to get involved in. And if you are moving from place to place, do keep it simple, especially on Sunday. Modes of transport could be annoying. Maybe there'll be traffic jams, or mechanical issues, or getting lost or just being annoyed with the whole process of traveling, of having to go from A to B. And so, ideally on Sunday, you should possibly stay in one place, or rely on very simple transport like walking. Don't feel that you have to go distances. Don't be reliant on buses or even your own car or good traffic conditions, because I don't think you can be reliant on it. And there are things that could really annoy you, and indeed could annoy other people. So do try to keep it simple, and don't take anything too seriously. And when it comes to money, there is a conjunction between Mercury and Neptune, and this conjunction between Mercury and Neptune might, for some Aquarians, have you thinking about money and thinking about financial possibilities. But Mercury is conjunct Neptune, and one way of looking at Mercury and Neptune conjunctions is to see it in terms of misunderstanding something. I mean, it can be about having great intuitions, Mercury conjunct Neptune, really understanding the situation on an emotional level, and maybe that could help you in a financial sense. But you do have to be careful, because Mercury conjunct Neptune is a deceptive aspect, and it is in Pisces, a sign which is connected with your finances. And so Mercury conjunct Neptune is interesting ideas about money, or maybe other people having interesting ideas about money, but these ideas might be crazy, they might be delusional, or they might need a lot of work to have any chance of being practical. So that's another area where you don't want to stop. You don't want to stop, make commitments. You need to be as flexible and fluid as possible, and that really is the best way of getting through the weekend. And if you don't make commitments and you keep it all simple, then I think that it should be a relatively good weekend. But I don't think it's going to be an exciting weekend, not particularly. Pisces, there are still a lot of planets in Pisces, but not quite as many as there used to be, because the moon is moving out of Pisces into Aries. And so if we think about it, what that means is that we had a new moon in Pisces, and right at the end of the month, February the 28th, we had a new moon at 9-10 degrees Pisces. And so that was a beginning for you, the Pisces new moon. It happens every year. Occasionally you're going to get 2 Pisces new moons, but not this year. So you've got a Pisces new moon, and with this Pisces new moon, you did get a sense of that something had started, that something had changed, but you weren't entirely sure where it was going. It certainly wasn't a time when you could announce anything. I mean, you could have announced something, but it wouldn't have been taken particularly seriously. It just wasn't the right time. But now the moon has moved into Aries. Now that the sun and the moon are in different signs, you do have a greater sense of objectivity, and it may be easier to consider some of the decisions you've recently made, and the conclusions you've come to, and you can perhaps be more open about it. And also you can start to consider the consequences, and that might be what the moon in Aries is about. You've decided you wanted to do things, but you weren't sure what the impact was going to be, but now you do start to see the impact, and that might mean that you realize that some of your initial ideas were a little bit far-fetched and need to be pared back a little. Maybe they're going to cost too much money, or you just didn't have the resources to see them through. But that's not going to stop the show. It just means that you need to make a few adjustments. Now, we do have a couple of aspects of importance. We have a conjunction between Mercury and Neptune. And this Mercury-Neptune conjunction is right at the end of your sign. And this Mercury-Neptune conjunction could work in several ways. It could make you a little gullible. I'm not saying you are gullible, but it might just mean that you take what someone says at face value. You believe them. With Mercury conjunct Neptune, it's not a good idea to believe anyone, even yourself, because some people are lying. Some people don't understand the truth. Some people will never understand the truth with Mercury conjunct Neptune. And so if someone sounds very sure of themselves, they're giving you the facts and they sound convincing, then your alarm bells should be ringing. The more sure someone is, then the more likely it is that they don't know what they're doing, or they're lying, or even they might be trying to deceive you. So that's one way in which Mercury-Neptune could work. But it could work the other way. Mercury conjunct Neptune can be about you being deceptive, holding on to the real truth and presenting just a version of the truth, Mercury conjunct Neptune. And that's something you're very good at, or you can be very good at. Pisces do have that certain sort of reputation, don't they? Slippery Pisces. And with that Mercury conjunct Neptune, you certainly can be slippery if you want to be. And people are likely to believe you. And so if you want to get someone to believe something which is just a pack of lies, then you've got a good chance. But that's not something you want to do. On the other hand, you just might feel that you want to just adjust the truth a little. I mean, not in a bad way. You just feel the raw truth may just feel a little too unpalatable. And with that Mercury conjunct Neptune, when you're presenting information, you're telling people about yourself and what you want. With that Mercury conjunct Neptune, you can adjust the truth ever so slightly and you'll sound very convincing. So it's good, Pisces, that you can be convincing, but don't push it too far. We also have a square aspect between the Sun and Jupiter. So you've got Sun in Pisces, square Jupiter in Gemini. And this is obviously an important aspect. The Sun is in your sign. Jupiter is your ruler. They're in square with each other. And it may encourage you, this aspect, to ask yourself, what is security? What does that mean? What does it mean to have no worries? What can you do to give yourself no worries? I mean, it's impossible to be in a situation where we do have no worries, but we can certainly reduce our worries, and we can do something to make ourselves feel more secure. And with this Sun square Jupiter, it may just occur to you, what your weak points are, where your vulnerabilities are. Maybe what keeps you awake at night, Sun square Jupiter. And Sun square Jupiter can be quite an excessive aspect. And therefore, rather than just allow the thing to just get out of hand, just Sun square Jupiter being excessive for the sake of it, Ask yourself what would need to happen to make yourself feel more comfortable, for you not to worry about things so much, and in particular not to worry about that one thing that really bothers you. And the Sun square Jupiter is creating possibilities for resolution. If we look at this Sun square Jupiter in a constructive sense, Jupiter is in Gemini. Jupiter is about, from a Pisces perspective, Jupiter is about making you feel secure, making you feel at home. Jupiter's not going to be in Gemini forever. It moves out of Gemini in June. And so this Sun square Jupiter is just a reminder that Jupiter is in Gemini, and it's a reminder that something needs to be done, something needs to be resolved. And this weekend you may get some hints, and you may get the impetus to do something which could make things, a whole lot better. And that's it. I now want to look at the weekend from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is the weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 45, which is gathering together. It's a very sociable hexagram, as its name suggests. It's about being with people, and it's about cooperation, and it's people having a common goal. And maybe there is a sense of leadership here, because if people are gathering together, you need to ask, who are they gathering around, or maybe what are they gathering around? There is a sense of common purpose. And ideally, you should see this weekend in terms of other people and in terms of getting support. And maybe it's about you giving support. People work best as a group, at least this weekend they do. And we have this, and we also have the bottom line moving. So with the bottom line moving, there's an indication that actually things are a little bit chaotic, and no one quite knows what to do. And what they need is direction. And some people have a need for leadership. Who is the leader? Who is going to get everything together? Now, that leadership may come from you. It might be that you have to create a situation where people gather around you, and you can create order out of chaos. Or it could be that you have to gravitate towards another person, someone who knows what's going on, someone who is wise and sensible and can sort everything out. So that's the first line moving. And so it's not a bad line, but it's a line that can't just be ignored. If one just allows things to be chaotic and everyone's moving in different directions, then, well, nothing will get done. So got this first line, and this moves, bottom line moves. So we move to a second hexagram, and it moves to hexagram 17, which is following. So it's a similar picture. Following is, again, about leadership and about deciding what one's role is. And if you want to be a leader, you have to be a follower. You have to understand what following is about, and you have to understand what people want, and be ready to oblige to an extent. And it also indicates, again, a common goal. So that's it. Not very exciting hexagrams, but I do think that this weekend, if possible, should be about other people and about people having a common goal and getting together to solve a problem. And I want to switch to the astrology, and I will start with the death of Boris Spassky. Then I will look at Venus going stationary direct. So we had Gene Hackman dying. We don't know exactly when he died, but that was the news. I did cover it in my previous video, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over old ground. But just as a reminder, here was Gene Hackman's horoscope. We have a time chart for Gene Hackman. He died a recluse. Got four planets in the 12th house, 3 planets in the 12th house, new moon in the 12th house. So that's kind of fitting, and that's also a reminder that the 12th house can be about the end of a matter, how it all ends, and this is how it ended. And Gene Hackman was born on January the 30th, 1930, so he was 95 when he died. And I pointed out yesterday that in his solar return for when he died, for solar return for his previous birthday, at the end of January, there was a new moon, and so new moons in a solar return can be important. They can indicate this is really an important year ahead for him, and it is a new beginning. Or in this case, you could say death is a new beginning. And there are other things in this solar return. He had Venus, Neptune, North Node on the ascendant. So the whole confusion about his death, North Node and Neptune on his ascendant plus Venus, that really does fit. But key point is new moon on his birthday. And he wasn't the only person who has recently died. Another person who has recently died is Boris Spassky. So Boris Spassky was world chess champion in I think from 1969 to 1972. So he was a renowned chess player. You might have seen his work if you'd ever watched the James Bond film From Russia with Love. So From Russia with Love, if you remember that film, which I think is the best Bond film, that's just my opinion. The beginning of From Russia with Love, there is a game of chess when I think the man's name is Kronstein, the Spectre agent, is playing chess. I think with someone from supposedly in the film, from someone from New Zealand, and he gets this message on his glass saying he has to report to Spectre immediately, and he sees this, and he very quickly, in a couple of moves, he just finishes the game and just disappears to meet up with Spectre. But that wasn't just an imaginary game of chess. That game of chess was based on, because From Russia with Love was made in 1963, was made on a 1960 game which took place in Leningrad between Boris Spassky and David Bronstein, and which it was considered to be a brilliant chess game which Boris Spassky won. And so Boris Spassky, of course, was also famous for being beaten in Reykjavik at the World Chess Championships by Bobby Fischer. And so Boris Spassky died, and he was born on January the 30th, 1937. So he was born exactly 7 years after Gene Hackman. And Boris Spassky, if we think about his solar return, I don't have a time of birth for Boris Spassky. And so it's kind of makes things a little bit difficult. But if we take Boris Spassky's solar return for 2025, it's pretty similar to Gene Hackman's solar return. So Boris Spassky had a new moon in Aquarius, solar return. And so his chart, new moon in the solar return, that suggests that it's an important year for him. And yes, indeed, it's an important year for him, because this is the year that he died. Now, while we're talking about Boris Spassky, while we're on this subject, I thought it would be a good opportunity to look at his relationship, or how he linked with Bobby Fischer. So here is the horoscope of Bobby Fischer, who beat him at the Reykjavik World Chess Championship. That 1972 championship was absolutely iconic, and it was a Cold War game. Boris Spassky, the Soviet player, against Bobby Fischer, the American, and of course Bobby Fischer won. And if you look at the synastry between Bobby Fischer and Boris Spassky, it's actually quite interesting, because I put Bobby Fischer on the inner wheel, and Bobby Fischer had his son. Bobby Fischer had his son at 18 Pisces, and Spassky had his Saturn at 19 Pisces. So Spassky's Saturn was on Bobby Fischer's sun, and I think that is perhaps an interesting lesson in synastry. So Boris Spassky was born of a Saturn-Neptune opposition on Bobby Fischer's sun. So you would have thought Saturn on the sun, it would be the sun being the one undermined by Bobby Fischer. You would have thought maybe Bobby Fischer would overcome his young challenger, but not in this case. It was Bobby Fischer's son was able to get through the defenses of Boris Spassky, and I suppose that chess is a game of attack and defense and getting the balance right, and so you could say that Bobby Fischer, with his sun in Pisces, was able to sort of get through. Was able to get through Boris Spassky, and so that's one thing about their charts, which I thought was really interesting. And if you look at that key synastry between Fischer and Spassky, Saturn conjunct their sun at 19, or 19 degrees Pisces for Saturn, Sun at 18 degrees Pisces. This all links up with Boris Spassky's death. So Boris Spassky died in Moscow, and at the time of his death, where's Boris Spassky gone? So at the time of his death, there's Boris Spassky's natal chart, and so Saturn was at 20 degrees 29 Pisces. So Boris Spassky died in the wake of his Saturn return. So he just had his Saturn return when he died, and so this would be the third Saturn return. So we get the first Saturn return at around 29, second Saturn return in the late 50s, and then the final Saturn return in one's late 80s. And so that really sort of ties things up. And also it was a transit for Bobby Fischer. So Bobby Fischer had his sun at 18 Pisces, and so Saturn had just gone over Bobby Fischer's sun. Of course, Bobby Fischer's been dead for some time, but in a way that Saturn was connecting the main synastry between Bobby Fischer and Boris Spassky. And in terms of Saturn cycles, so here's Boris Spassky's chart, and there is the question of what was going on when he resigned. So he played his last game at the tournament in Reykjavik on let's get this right, August the 31st, 1972, and he resigned the day after, and he resigned by phone. So he didn't even do it face to face, and so if we look at what was going on for Spassky, on the 1st of September, I don't know what time he resigned. I've gone for 9 o'clock in the morning in Reykjavik, and so look at Saturn. So Saturn was at 1943 Gemini. So it was square his Saturn. So it does seem that Boris Spassky, in terms of these big events in his life, losing against Bobby Fischer and dying, does relate to the Saturn cycle. So in 1972, he would have just turned. He was 35. So that's when you have your first Saturn square after the Saturn return. That's when he lost against Bobby Fischer, and then during his third Saturn return was when he died. Now he resigned by telephone, and I don't think he turned up on September the 1st. It was a bit graceless, maybe. Although later on, Spassky and Fischer got on quite well, and when Fischer got into trouble with the American authorities for breaking sanctions, I think against Serbia, Spassky wrote to President Bush asking him to reconsider, telling him to give Fischer a break. So they didn't get on badly in the end, but there was something a little bit graceless about the end of it, resigning by telephone. So resigning by telephone. So on the 1st of September at 9 o'clock in the morning, again, I don't know what time precisely that phone call was made, Uranus was at 1617 Libra, and again, don't know exactly where Spassky's Mercury is, but so Uranus was square Spassky's Mercury when he made that phone call, when he resigned. So Uranus square Mercury, a sudden resignation. I mean that's good astrology, I think. Now, one thing I was going to point out, or am going to point out, is that Gene Hackman and Boris Spassky, they had new moons in their solar returns, and someone else who has a new moon in their solar return is Barack Obama. So here is Barack Obama's horoscope, and here is Barack Obama's solar return for his last birthday, August the 4th, 2024. And you can see he's got an exact new moon in his solar return on the IC. I've set his chart for Honolulu. I think he was born in Honolulu. You might disagree, but it doesn't matter where he was born. He has a new moon on his birthday. So, what's going on with Obama? Is this new moon still working? What is he doing? And I think that perhaps is an important question. Does it relate to his marriage? Does it relate to his political activities? I'm not saying Obama's going to drop dead with a new moon in his solar return. I mean, why should he? I mean, he's in his early 60s. I'm sure he's in excellent health, but it is an important year potentially for Obama with a new moon in his solar return. And if you see a solar return with a new moon, it's something you should be thinking about. And now I want to switch to Venus being stationary direct and Venus, it's not. It's stationary retrograde. I seem to have stationary direct on the. I can't seem to get this out of my head. I've even called this chart Venus SD. Let me just change the name of it, make it clear that it's stationary retrograde. There you go. Venus stationary retrograde. So, by the way, in this video, if I have, which I think I have done, I in several places I called it stationary direct rather than stationary retrograde. I do know that Venus is stationary retrograde. So this is the moment that Venus is stationary retrograde, and it goes stationary at when it's at 10 degrees 50 retrograde. 10 degrees 50. Well, that you see there's a little R there. 10 degrees 50 is the point it goes retrograde. And what does this mean? It goes retrograde when it is conjunct Venus. So Moon-Venus conjunction. And now that might suggest that Venus going stationary retrograde isn't necessarily such a problem. It's quite a nice aspect, Moon conjunct Venus. And so it may be with this Venus retrograde, regardless of its generic meaning, that some of us might experience Venus going retrograde as quite a pleasant event, as things moving, maybe relationships can work. Again, we don't expect relationships to work with Venus going retrograde, particularly if Venus is in Aries. But I do think that Moon-Venus conjunction is significant, and maybe I'm being too simplistic about that Moon-Venus conjunction. So if we think about Venus's retrograde movement, so the way it works is this: it's just gone retrograde now, and it's in Pisces going retrograde. Sorry, it's in Aries, so it goes backwards, and then March the 27th, Venus goes back into Pisces, so it goes back into its exaltation, and then it keeps going backwards until April the 12th, 13th. When it goes, then it does go stationary direct, and after that it starts going forward again. April the 30th, Venus goes back into Aries, and then on May the 15th, Venus gets to 10 degrees Aries again. So on May the 15th, that's when the whole Venus retrograde cycle is over, and that's the moment when we finally have recovered from Venus going retrograde. So how should you relate to Venus retrograde? Well, possibly you should avoid doing things connected with Venus, particularly if they require heavy commitment. Should you be buying beautiful objects when Venus is in retrograde? Probably not, especially if they're expensive objects. Should you be having non-essential cosmetic surgery with Venus retrograde? The kind of cosmetic surgery, it doesn't really matter when you have it. It's just something you'd like to have. I don't know much about cosmetic surgery, but if you're planning on cosmetic surgery, maybe you should wait until Venus goes direct, and then wait a little bit more, because Venus goes direct on May the 15th when Venus is in Aries. So maybe you should wait until Venus goes into Taurus. So not a good time for cosmetic surgery. Of course, that's just one thing to consider. Lots of people are going to have cosmetic surgery when Venus is retrograde, and nothing bad is going to happen. But if we just want to use astrology, we possibly should just wait. It's just one other thing to consider. And as far as relationships are concerned, relationships with Venus going retrograde, they might be all over the place. It may be difficult to know what's going on, especially with a new relationship. If it's an old relationship, well, then you've got used to the planetary cycles by now. But if it's a new relationship, with Venus going retrograde, people might change their minds. People might be indecisive. Probably not a good time to get married when Venus is retrograde. I know that people like to get married sort of early summer, don't they? Spring weddings, but spring wedding probably would be inclined to wait until Venus goes into Taurus before getting married. You don't want to get married when Venus is in Aries. You don't want to get married when Venus is in retrograde. When Venus is retrograde, but again, as with weddings, it's just one other thing to consider. Lots of people get married with Venus retrograde, and nothing terrible happens. Now we can look at this Venus retrograde in closer detail, and when we do look at this Venus retrograde in closer detail, we see some stuff going on which is maybe a little bit disturbing. It might not be connected with Venus retrograde, but rather it's just to do with what is happening this weekend. So one thing you can do with this is ask what is Venus doing? What aspects, what midpoints is Venus on when it goes retrograde? And one midpoint that Venus is on is the Cupido Hades midpoint. So actually, let me just show you what I mean by Cupido Hades. So Cupido and Hades are two hypothetical planets in the Uranian school. Cupido is the planet of love. I think it's also, could be argued that it's a planet of artillery barrages, because that's how Witte discovered supposedly this planet, by observing Russian artillery barrages during the First World War. But it is seen to be a planet of love, connected with marriage and with unions. Hades, by contrast, is a planet connected with things that are unpleasant, criminal. There's a connection with death. And if we just show the hypothetical planets, so here are all the hypothetical planets. There is the planet. Where's Cupido gone? Cupido is, so there's Cupido. You can see that Cupido is a mixture of the symbol for Jupiter with the symbol of Venus. So it's just Venus superimposed upon Jupiter. And Hades is, there's Hades at 13 degrees 2 Cancer. So the symbol for Hades is, you can see the cross, as in the cemetery. And then if you look at where Venus is square Hades, and it is square Cupido. So Venus is indeed on the Cupido Hades midpoint. So really strange Cupido Hades midpoint. It's about love, but it's a kind of an unpleasant love. It's a love that is somehow compromised. And so new relationships taking place, Venus stationary direct on the Cupido Hades midpoint, it could be difficult and should perhaps be avoided. And of course, I'm being a little bit melodramatic here, but still, that was something that was something I definitely noticed. See, there's Hades, there's Cupido, Venus on the Cupido Hades midpoint. So what does Alfred Witte say about it? I haven't looked at this before. So Alfred Witte, in his Rules of Planetary Pictures, he goes through all of the midpoint combinations, and turning to the Cupido Hades midpoint, he says miserable love associations, prostitution, poor housing, compelled to be satisfied with anything. So that is pretty unpleasant. That might be a different view of Venus, of Venus going stationary direct. Yeah, it might be conjunct the moon, but being on being on the Cupid-Hades midpoint, it could be about relationships, getting into relationships, but are these relationships the right relationships? Relationships could be a real problem. Now, there's another thing about the midpoints taking place, about some of the midpoints taking place at the time of Venus going stationary direct. And so if we put Saturn on the dial, so here's the Sun, and here is this conjunction between Neptune, Mercury, and the North Node on the nodal axis. And so Saturn brings the Sun together with Neptune, Mercury, and the North Node. And it may have nothing to do with Mercury, with Venus, the moment that Venus is going stationary direct, but it does give us the general picture about what is broadly happening when Venus is going stationary retrograde. When Venus is stationary retrograde, it just gives us a broad picture about what is happening. And so it does mean that there is a lot of scope for getting badly let down, I would have said, and could be getting badly let down in relationships. Saturn on the Sun-Neptune midpoint, Saturn on the Sun-Mercury midpoint, or getting bad news, Saturn on the South Node midpoint. Other people are disappointing, and they don't match our expectations, and so that Saturn configuration is kind of worrying. And also Saturn is on the Cupido-Admetos midpoint. So Cupido-Admetos midpoint is about love which is kind of held back, which is delayed, which is restricted. And so if we look at the midpoint structure, and we go beyond that simple Moon-Venus conjunction in Aries, we get the picture of love which is not really working very well, that it's a time when relationships could be disappointing, they could be even worse, and relationships could lead us into difficult areas. I mean, but I'm being over dramatic here, of course. And maybe it's a warning about new relationships, where new relationships can lead. And relationships are not just about romance; it's about people you meet. Who are you meeting at the moment? What kind of people are we coming across, and what do these people want? So that is a view on Venus going stationary direct. It's not quite as good as it sounds, and with all that in mind, I did want to look at the horoscope of Germany. So here is the horoscope for the unification of Germany. It's set for Berlin. And so you can see that the midheaven of this chart is 1038 Aries. So Venus goes stationary direct on Germany's midheaven. And midheaven represents leadership. It represents government. It's where the country is going. Now, you might say that Venus going stationary retrograde is on Germany's midheaven could be a good thing. Well, it would be a good thing if a woman had been elected as Chancellor of Germany, or is about to become Chancellor of Germany. Now, that's not going to happen. There has been a female candidate who is Alice Weidel, but her party got 20% of the vote, and she's been frozen out. So it's obviously not going to be Alice Weidel. But it may be that with this Venus going stationary retrograde on Germany's midheaven, and that Venus is not as good as it sounds. It's got Moon conjunct Venus. Yes, that's nice. But when we looked at Venus, it was Venus was on the Cupido-Hades midpoint, and it was something problematic there, and it just may be that Alice Weidel is not going to go away, or it may have something else to do with women in politics and how Germany relates to the feminine and how women are treated in Germany, and this might become a political issue. But somehow I do feel that this Venus going stationary retrograde on Germany's midheaven is a significant factor. And that's it. That's all I'm going to say for today. I hope you found this video of some interest. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again very soon.